When darkness falls and the storm clouds gather, when the fiery trials threaten to leave nothing but ashes, the real question in life is not why do the righteous suffer, but how should the righteous suffer? Well, we're going to attempt to cover several chapters this time. Job and his three friends have been going back and forth in 3 rounds of debate, and his 3 friends are running out of steam. Mm-hmm. And this is the shortest of the chapters. Bildad now speaks up. It makes sense he's the shortest guy in the group because he is a shoe height.
Oh my God.
I mean, he's even shorter than Nehemiah, right? You know, the only thing is worse than dad jokes, preacher jokes. Let's jump right in there. Verse 1 of chapter 25. Then answered Bildad the Shuhite and said, Dominion and fear are with him. He maketh peace in his high places. Is there any number of his armies? And upon whom doth not his light arise? How then can man be justified with God? Or how can he be clean that is born of a woman? Behold, even to the moon, and it shineth not. Yea, the stars are not pure in his sight. How much less that is a worm? How much less man that is a worm, and the Son of Man, which is a worm?
Wow.
More of the same. I mean, as far as they're just frustrated with Job. And it's crazy because so he says, man's just a worm. Mm-hmm. And so you've got 3 maggots frustrated telling another maggot that he's a maggot. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really what it boils down to.
That's a good point.
But it is interesting, though, that he says man is a worm and the Son of Man is a worm. You could really go down a rabbit trail there in Psalm 22, where David is speaking prophetically about Jesus' death, and Jesus says, I am a worm and no man. You know, so God became a man became a lamb, the lamb became a worm in order to redeem us worms, you know.
Well, he's got a one-dimensional view of God. Every single thing he says is and it's not really, and it's his view of God. I don't even know if any of this is really accurate that he's saying. Because you can't have one part of God without
There you go.
the other.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, while Bildad is going on and on, just doubling down on what he's already said. You know, man can't be pure before God. You're nothing more, Job, than a worm and a maggot. This might sound real good to Bildad or even to some people, but this is not the way God thinks about us.
Right. These
So we
words aren't coming out of God's mouth.
Right. We should definitely remember to be humble before the Lord and not think that we're more than we are, but this is not the way. I mean, the psalmist says we're the apple of God's eye.
His thoughts toward us are outnumber the sand.
So he don't think I'm a worm or a
39.
maggot.
It's interesting, though, because this whole time these guys have been arguing, if you do good, good's going to happen. If you are good, you're going to get good. But they're constantly telling Job, he is no good and he can be no good.
Right.
You know, so now on one hand, they're saying, hey, if you were the righteous guy you were supposed to be, then all these things would be right in your life. But then he argues, well, how can a man be justified before God? Well, obviously, we know in the scripture that it's not because he's good. Mm-hmm. You know, what these guys thought they were, contrary to what they thought Job was, none of them we're going to be justified based on that.
Yep.
You know, Romans 5, we've discussed it in past studies, we're justified by faith, which is something that Job hasn't put off. He's struggling, but he's still clinging to his faith in the Lord.
And I think this is what you're hitting on. You can tell me if I just repeated what you just said, but how then can a man be justified with God? They were telling him originally that this is what you need to do to be justified with God. Now they're saying you can't be justified with God.
Right.
So they're contradicting themselves.
Completely. The entire time they've been doing that.
So now, after 6 verses of Bildad, Job responds with 6 chapters. They're running out of steam. They're getting tired. But
Well, so
Job
much
is
so,
not.
Zophar doesn't even weigh in on
Right,
this
yeah, yeah.
final argument.
And these are the final words of
Job
these
is just
3.
warming up.
And Job's like, nope, Job's going to double down. And it says, but Job answered and said, how hast thou helped him that is without power? How savest thou the arm that hath no strength? How hast thou counseled him that hath no wisdom? And how hast thou plentifully declared the thing as it is? To whom hast thou uttered words, and whose spirit came from thee? This might be a jab back to chapter 4 where Eliphaz was saying, hey, in the night visions, a spirit come to me. And he's like, hey, where did that spirit come from you? That you just said what you said.
Yeah.
Where's that coming?
And once again, my friends ain't no help at all.
Yeah. And then he goes for the rest of this chapter basically saying, look, I know how great God is. He says, dead things are formed under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. So he talks about stuff that's below. Now he talks about stuff above. He says, he stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing, which is really crazy because during this time they were thinking the earth was on the back of turtles, and the thought in that day. And here's Job, like Isaiah says, he sits in the circle of the earth. And in all these years, it took people that didn't know the Bible to think the earth was flat and all of this stuff.
There's
Job's
still
saying,
people that think the earth's flat.
well, okay. But he says he hangs the earth on nothing. He says he bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them. He holdeth back the face of his throne, and spreadeth his cloud upon it. He hath compassed the waters with bonds until the day and night come to an end. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his reproof. He divideth the sea with his power, and by his understanding he smiteth through the proud. By his spirit he hath garnished the heavens. His hand hath formed the crooked serpent. Lo, these are parts of his ways, but how little a portion is heard of him. But the thunder of his voice, the thunder of his power, who can understand?
God is infinitely more powerful, much more greater, and is much more complex than any of my friends or anyone else will ever understand, is basically what Job's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just trounced Bildad, the Shuhite. He just trounced his vision
You'll never
of
forget
God. Yeah. With a more vast, more accurate view of God. But he's still got a way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, because when the Lord shows up, he's going to take Job to school. But Job's saying, look, I know how great God is. You guys are trying to tell me how great God is. I know that. But these guys are talking general revelation. They're talking about things that you can see in nature. Like Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. But what Job's been crying out for, it's not general revelation. Job's really crying out for a relationship that can only come through God's incarnation.
Right.
Oh, that there was a daysman. I know my Redeemer liveth. So I think the beauty of the book of Job, and there's so many things that we can learn, for me so far in this discussion has been this hunger and longing in his heart. The psalmist says, as the deer pants after the water. I believe every human being has a longing deep within them, as they say, that God-shaped hole, and that only he can satisfy, even though they try to stuff everything in it.
Spend the whole life looking for it.
Yeah, and Job's crying out for incarnation. He's wanting to know God. He's wanting to see him. And his argument is kind of like, you guys keep talking to me about things that everybody can see, with the eye. I mean, you can look around, the heavens declare. But he says, that's just a snippet of who he is, guys. There's got to be more than what
Right.
you keep.
He's crying for something deeper. They, in themselves, feel like they're satisfied.
They get God figured out.
Right. But Job is looking for salvation. He's looking for that deep, intimate walk and relationship with the Lord. He's truly thirsting in his soul. And these guys are just content in a sense. Maybe they aren't. Maybe, their frustration is that that he's not saying the same things that they're saying. So
What you guys have or think you have
Right.
is good and grand, but I want something more.
Yeah.
That's
But that's another one of the truths that come out of this book for us, is it's human nature for Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, who obviously are doing pretty good, to be satisfied with their understanding of who God is and whatever level of relationship they think they have with him. Job, on the other hand, in the midst of pain and suffering, is longing for something more. Because that surface level that they're discussing, don't cut it.
Right, it's not enough.
When life really hits the bottom, you need something bigger. You need someone bigger. You need someone that can reach down in the depths where you are and lift you up. Motivational speaking and all of that stuff, that's not going to...
And I think this also proves that if any of these other guys were in this situation, their theology would crash down upon us and they might have cursed God and died, but Job didn't.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So Job continues in chapter 27. He says, "Moreover, Job continued his parable and said, As God liveth, who hath taken away my judgment, and the Almighty, who hath vexed my soul, all the while my breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils. My lips shall not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. God forbid that I should justify you. Till I die, I will not remove mine integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me so long as I live." He's like, I know you guys would be happy as could be if I would just say, you know what, you're right. I'm guilty. He says, but if I were to do so, I would be guilty because I'm not guilty. He says, and he's just doubled down.
Yeah.
He's
like,
restating, he's a righteous man.
Yep, and yeah. And I imagine their eyes rolling in the back of their head at this point, because they're give out. They're over it, and Job's doubled down. You haven't moved me.
They're
one
calling a cab, they're ready to go back home, they can't deal with Job anymore.
And that's, just a couple of things. Number one, that's where, the truth is relentless.
Yeah.
The righteousness is relentless. You know how the proverb says that the wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion.
Yeah.
And then the other part of this is where Job, the thought just escaped me, but keep talking. I'll think. I'll remember because there was. But yeah, just keep
But,
talking. I figured it out. I got it.
I love how the Holy Spirit does that.
I know it's righteousness. Job has a righteousness that he does not realize yet, because he believes God, and
Yeah. Oh,
as it says
wow.
without Abraham, that Abraham believed
Was
God and it was
counted to
counted
him.
him as righteous. Job has no idea that he is righteous because he believes God
Yeah.
at this point.
But what a life lesson, though, because we live in a day and an age with cancel culture and everything else, where if you say something or you take a stand and all the world pressures you, we see over and over again backpedaling. Whether it be politicians, organizations, preachers, Christians, individuals, Now, if they're wrong, by all means,
Yeah.
backpedal.
Yeah.
But what a life lesson for Job to know what he believes, believe it, and be unapologetic
Oh, yeah.
about it. Even though these guys are hammering him, have been hammering him, he's still saying, you know what, I'm not moving. No matter how hard you,
He's not a populist. He doesn't care about
No.
being, everybody's best friend and agreeing with what they agree with just in order to go along to get along. He's not, he's not into that.
Yeah.
He says, I know the truth.
Yeah.
This is who I am, and it doesn't matter what you've got to say.
yeah. Wow. And it's one of the reasons why God is able to write this book. Yeah, how have I hindered God's story? Because I stopped being who God wanted me to be. Because I'm trying to make someone else happy with the me they want me to be.
Wow.
And we do that all the time.
The church does that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness, look how far, we're fixing to start the book of Acts, and I'm excited about it. But as we look at the book of Acts, you look at the church and you go, wow, what happened? Because we allow the world to tell us who we're supposed to be. And it's crazy.
Yeah.
Verse 7, he says, let mine enemy be as the wicked, and he that riseth up against me as the unrighteous. For what is the hope of the hypocrite, though he hath gained, when God taketh away his soul?
Ooh.
Will God hear his cry when trouble cometh upon him? Will he delight himself in the Almighty? Will he always call upon God? I will teach you by the hand of God that which is with the Almighty will I not conceal. Behold, all ye yourselves have seen it. Why then are ye thus altogether vain? This is the portion of the wicked man with God, and the heritage of the oppressors, which they shall receive of the Almighty. If his children be multiplied, it is for the sword, and his offspring shall not be satisfied with bread. Those that remain of him shall be burned in death, or buried in death, and his widows shall not weep. Though he heap up silver as the dust, and prepare raiment as the clay, he may prepare it, but the just shall put it on, and the innocent shall divide the silver. He buildeth his house as a moth, and as a booth that the keeper maketh. The rich man shall lie down, but he shall not be gathered. He openeth his eyes, and he is not. Terrors take hold on him as waters. A tempest stealeth him away in the night. The east wind carrieth him away, and he departeth. And as a storm hurleth him out of his place. For God shall cast upon him and not spare. He would fain flee out of his hand. Men shall clap their hands at him, and shall hiss him out of his place.
Y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but when I'm looking here, especially verses 7 through, 12, does it look like Job is calling on God to count them, his three friends, as his enemy,
Yeah.
and to judge them accordingly like he would the wicked?
Well, what's also interesting in verses...
Which is a turn a little bit.
Yeah.
Verses 12 through 23 are all the things that his friends have said all this time about the wicked. And Job is kind of flipping it over on them.
Ooh.
It's kind of like what Jesus says in Matthew 7. Judge not that you be not judged, for with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And with what measure you meet, it shall be measured to you again. Job's taken all this judgment they've heaped on him, and he's just tossing it back in their lap.
He's heaping some burning coals on their head, huh?
So in chapter 28, he talks about wisdom, and he uses some analogies that we find in Proverbs about searching for it, digging in the earth as treasures and gems and that type of thing. He's fed up with knowledge. I mean, he's heard knowledge, he's heard knowledge, he's heard knowledge. And we've said this before, a lot of what these three guys have said is correct in the sense that it's true, but it's just not correct in the sense that it applies to Job, which is the difference between knowledge and wisdom. you can be educated beyond measure, but if you don't know how to apply that, what good is it? And that's what's wrong with our world today. It's being run by people who think they're elite. They have all this knowledge. Follow the science, all of this stuff, but they have no wisdom. They don't have the ability to apply that to life and have it make sense. And so Job kind of starts that conversation. He says, surely there is a vein for the silver and a place for gold where they find it. Iron is taken out of the earth and brass is molten out of the stone. He setteth an end to darkness and searcheth out all perfection. The stones of darkness and the shadow of death. The flood breaketh out from the inhabitant. Even the waters forgotten of the foot. They are dried up and are gone away from men. As for the earth, out of it cometh bread, and under it turneth up as it were fire. The stones of it are a place of sapphire, and it hath dust of gold. There is a path where no fowl knoweth, and which the vulture's eye hath not seen. The lion's whelp have not trodden it, and the fierce lion passeth. And not the fierce lion pass by it. He's talking about being under the earth. He putteth forth his hand upon the rock and overturneth the mountain by his roots. He cutteth out rivers among the rocks, and his eye seeth every precious thing. He bindeth the floods from overflowing, and the thing that is hid bringeth he forth the light. But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man knoweth not the price thereof, neither is it found in the land of the living. The depth saith, it is not in me, and the sea saith, it is not in me. It cannot be gotten for gold, neither shall silver be weighed for the price thereof. It cannot be valued with the gold of Ophir, with the precious onyx or the sapphire. The gold and the crystal cannot equal it, and the exchange of it shall not be for jewels or fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of pearls, for the price of wisdom is above rubies. The topaz of Ethiopia shall not equal it, neither shall it be valued with pure gold. Whence then cometh wisdom? And where is the place of understanding? Seeing it is hid from the eyes of all living, and kept close from the fowls of the air. Destruction and death say, where we have heard the fame thereof with our ears. God understandeth the way thereof, and he knoweth the place thereof. For he looketh to the ends of the earth, and seeth under the whole heaven, to make the weight for the winds, and he weigheth the waters by measure. When he made a decree for the rain, and a way for the lightning of the thunder, then did he see it, and declare it. He prepared it, yea, and searched it out. And unto man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding.
I underlined that verse, because
Yeah.
that verse 28, this is where Job recognizes that wisdom only comes from God, and it can't be found any other place. I mean, just listen. Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom.
Yeah.
That's what he's telling his friends, these yahoos that think they've got it all figured out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and he asks in verse 12, where is wisdom?
That sounds like Solomon.
And in 20, he says, whence then cometh wisdom? I'm reminded of James, because James starts off saying, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations. James is writing to a group of people who are in trouble. And he says, in that trouble, here's what you need, wisdom. And you get it by asking in faith, because I think Job is realizing, like my friends, I thought I'd had it all figured out. And I'm being wrecked right now. And this is not making sense. So I need wisdom. I'm not finding it with you, yahoos, he says, but the fear of the Lord. I know that's the beginning point. He's like, I fear God. He does fear the Lord,
Yes,
and
he
he's
does.
now his fear is going to
It's
grow
gonna expand.
exponentially.
It's gonna expand.
But right now he knows that he does, and he knows that's the only place If this is ever going to make sense, God's going to make it make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, it's got to come from the Lord. He's not pulling these ideas out of his head. He's looking to God.
Yeah.
It's like the whole time he's crying out to God.
Yep.
He's wanting an answer.
and it's crazy because all of these cries of Job's heart is answered in the New Testament.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because he says it's hid from man. But then Paul in Colossians chapter 2 says, in him, in Christ, is hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So what Job's looking for is what we're all looking for. Some people just don't know it. We're
Yeah.
looking for Christ.
That's true.
We're
Yep.
searching for him. All the answers that we're trying to come to is found in him.
Yep.
So,
and will always be found in him.
yeah. So in chapter 29, he starts reminiscing the past, his past prosperity. He says, moreover, Job continued his parable and said, oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God preserved me, when his candle shined upon my head, and when by his light I walked through darkness, as I was in the days of my youth, when the secret of God was upon my tabernacle, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were about me. Oh. When I washed my steps with butter, and the rock poured me out rivers of oil. When I went out of the gate through the city, and I prepared my seat in the street, the young men saw me and hid themselves, and the aged arose and stood up. The princes refrained talking and laid their hand on their mouth. The nobles held their peace, and their tongue cleaved to the roof of their mouth. When the ear heard me, then it blessed me. And when the eye saw me, it gave witness unto me. Because, he says, I delivered the poor that cried, and the fatherless, and him that had none to help him. The blessing of him that was ready to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My judgment was as a robe and a diadem. I was eyes to the blind, and feet was I to the lame. I was a father to the poor, and the cause which I knew not I searched out. And I break the jaws of the wicked, and pluck the spoil out of his teeth. Then I said, I shall die in my nest. I shall multiply my days as the sand. My root was spread out by the waters, and the dew lay all night upon my branch. My glory was fresh in me, and my bow was renewed in my hand. Unto me men gave ear, and waited, and kept silence at my counsel. After my words they spake not again, and my speech dropped upon them. And they waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouth wide as for the latter rain. If I laughed on them, they believed it not, and the light of my countenance they cast not down. I chose out their way, and sat chief, and dwelt as a king in the army, as one that comforteth the mourners.
I think this whole chapter is a good representation of what we all feel when we're facing trials. This chapter just pretty much sums it all up, because we all do that. We all sit down in our troubles or in our hurts, and we start thinking, man, I remember when it was so good. Back before, I wish I could just go back, kind of like we've been doing like with this year. Right? Hey, if we could just go back to the way it was in 2019, because 2020 hadn't been that great to us, right? But then he goes on from there, and he gets real specific, and there I think it's verse 6, he kind of lets us know what his greatest pain is. Remember, he's hurting right now. Mm-hmm. He's hurting in body, he's hurting in his mind, he's hurting in his spirit. He's in some real pain, but then in verse 6, verse 5, he pretty much goes on and he talks about how he's without his children. But verse 4, I'll get it right. Verse 4, he talks about how his greatest pain is probably the idea here that he's lost relationship with God. He's fearful that he might have lost his relationship with God, and that would be his greatest pain.
Yeah. Well, I think another thing that he brings out in this chapter too is there was a day when what I said mattered.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been talking to you guys until I'm blue in the face.
Yeah.
And you guys just don't want to hear anything
Yeah.
that I've got to say.
People used to respect me. People used to want to hear my counsel.
Yeah.
But now?
But now they don't want to. They don't want to talk to me because I've lost everything.
Right, which is again, that theology that basically
Yeah.
is what God's doing is emptying Job of everything,
Yep, shaking.
shaking out the nonsense.
Shaking up.
Not only do they not want to talk to me, but they want to talk about me now.
Yeah.
And they want to laugh at me and
But
mock
it's
me
interesting because
And talk at me.
and talk at me.
Yeah. Early on, though, Job said, "I wish I was never born." You know, that early onset when this first took place, he's like, "I just wish I could die. I wish I was never born." Now, though, as time has passed, he's thinking back and he's based on what he's saying, he's like, "Man, I had it pretty good. I was blessed. God was doing a lot for me." And sometimes I think it takes trouble for us to, unfortunately, to recognize what we do have.
True.
'Cause,
Hindsight
you know,
is what?
2020, they say.
Well, and I think that, and I think also too, through, like you said, recognize what we have, but also you have an opportunity to thank God for what you had.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, oh, if I could be back there, it's like, well, you were there.
Yeah.
You know, you can still be thankful for what God did for you. You know, it's again, it's cleaning up this thinking. Why do you deserve that? You know, why do you deserve things to be good at all?
Right, and
You
he
really
said that in what, chapter 2? He's like, what makes me think
Yeah.
that I always deserve good?
You know, it's crazy because we write our blessings in the sand and our sorrows in stone. You know, it took Job to get to this place to probably realize what in the world he really did have. You know, I mean, God was the one boasting about everything. You know, no, it was Satan that was the one who was boasting everything that he had.
Yep.
And now Job is like, wow, I was in a good
He
place.
took it for granted. He was oblivious, not necessarily oblivious, but he was, what's the word I'm looking for? Taking it for granted. He was callous to it.
It's easy to get
And
that way when things are good.
Complacent.
not only was he wasn't content because he's worried about his kids, so he's praying for his kids. So it's like God is doing a lot of things, you know.
Right, that's something interesting, because in the beginning of the book, when we first find out about Job, we hear that he prayed for his kids every night, or just on the happenstance that they might have done something wrong. But we don't hear that he himself was giving praise and thanks to God
Yeah, I think
for all of these blessings that now he's recounting.
right.
But he's thinking back in the past, you know, and it's been said that it's okay for the past to be a rudder to help guide you, but when it becomes an anchor that holds you back, that's when, you know, you're running into trouble, because Job is, but he doesn't stick in the past, because the next chapter,
Right.
30, he goes into his pain. So
Right.
he remembers his past prosperity. Now he's thinking about his present pain, and that's eclipsed all the rest. He says, "But now," that's how he starts off 30. "But now, they that are younger than I have me in derision, whose fathers I would have disdained to have set with the dogs of my flock. Yea, whereunto might the strength of their hands profit me, in whom old age was perished? For want and famine they were solitary, fleeing into the wilderness, in former time desolate and waste, who cut up mallows by the bushes and juniper roots for their meat." They were just scavengers, he says. "They were driven forth from among men. They cried after them as after a thief, to dwell in the cities of the valleys, in the caves of the earth, and in the rocks. Among the bushes they brayed, under the nettles they were gathered together. They were children of fools, yea, children of base men. They were viler than the earth. And now am I their song, yea, I am their byword. They abhor me, they flee far from me, and spare not to spit in my face, because he hath loosed my cord and afflicted me. They have also let loose the bridle before me. Upon my right hand rise the youth. They push away my feet, and they rise up against me, the ways of their destructions. They mar my path and set forward my calamity. They have no helper. They came upon me as wide breaking of waters. In the desolation they rolled themselves upon me. Terrors are turned upon me. They pursue my soul as the wind, and my welfare passeth away as a clod. And now my soul is poured out upon me. The days of affliction have taken hold upon me. My bones are pierced in me in the night season, and my sinews take no rest. By the great force of my disease is my garment changed. It bindeth me about as a collar of my coat. He hath cast me into the mire, and I am become like dust and ashes. I cry unto thee, and thou dost not hear me. I stand up, and thou regardest me not. Thou art become cruel to me with thy strong hand. Thou opposest thyself against me. Thou liftest me up to the wind, and causeth me to ride upon it, and dissolvest my substance. For I know that thou wilt bring me to death, and to the house appointed for all living. Howbeit he will not stretch out his hand to the grave, though they cry in his destruction. Did not I weep for him that was in trouble? Was not my soul grieved for the poor? When I looked for good, then evil came unto me. And when I waited for light, there came darkness. My bowels boiled and rested not. The days of affliction prevented me. I went mourning without the sun. I stood up and I cried in the congregation. I am a brother to dragons and a companion to owls. My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat. My harp also is turned into mourning, and my organ into the voice of them that weep. It didn't take him long to forget the past.
No. He's not only talking about, oh, well, my body's falling apart, but now, once again, I feel abandoned by God.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the big challenge.
Mm-hmm.
The right now. We think the challenge is the past, and we think the challenge is the future. That's where we spend a lot of our seeming troubles, but really, the now. The now is our biggest struggle. You know, we want to change what we did back there. We're hoping forward's going to be different. But the right now is where God is.
Mm-hmm.
This is where
Here in the middle.
He's right here in the right now. And when we long for something different than what God wants right now, then we're just tormenting ourselves to no cause.
Yeah.
Because wherever we're at right now is where God wants us.
Mm-hmm.
And we spend most of our time wanting to be anywhere but there. You know, right now is, we don't want the right now. And that's where Job's at. He's like, oh, back there, oh, if I had those days back there, but now, look at me now. But right now, God is doing something greater than he has done. And all that previous chapter, all that he talked about, we would think, now that's blessings. That's a man of God where he ought to be, getting what he ought to get, you know. But in reality, Job has never been closer to the Lord than he is right now, even though he feels far, far, far away. I shared this in one of our past discussions. I got in trouble one time. I was talking to a group of pastors, and I said in that discussion, the greatest struggle for the believer, I think, is to walk by faith and not by feelings.
Yes.
Yeah, I got smacked for that statement, but it's true. And that's what the Lord's trying to get me to do, is to walk by what he says and not by what I'm feeling. And that's where he's struggling with where he's at.
Yeah, especially when you're in that situation, the situation that he's in, or a hard situation. You've got your trust in the Lord, lean not to your understanding in all your ways, acknowledge him, and he'll direct your paths. God is not, he's specific to our heart. The situation is nothing to him. It's what it's doing to work in your life. We're situational. We want things to be good. If things are bad, and this is just our nature.
Yeah.
If things are bad, what do I do to make him bad? And what do I have to do to make him good? But as opposed to saying, Lord, He gives, he takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Yeah, we're focused on what did I do or what do I need to do?
How did this happen?
Instead of
How
what
can
are-
I change it?
Instead of what are you doing?
What did I do?
Or what
are
do I
you
need to
doing?
do? What are you doing? And God is doing something. God handpicked Job for this occasion.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, he purposely picked up. He could have called anybody's name. Where you been, Satan? Here and there, doing my thing. Have you considered Job? He could have picked anybody else. He specifically picked Job. But Job don't know that.
Yeah.
Just like I don't know what God is doing sometimes with where I'm at and what I'm struggling with. And I just need to get my focus on him and stop worrying about the past and worrying about the future. And it's what God's been trying to get me to come to grips with this year when one day in my quiet time I was reading through Psalm 62 and verse 5 jumped off the page. My soul, wait thou only upon God, for my expectation is from him. What is your expectation? Not mine. And I think that's what Paul says in Philippians, where he says, I have learned. In other words, he didn't know this before. It wasn't something that came natural. He says, I've learned how to be content. I've learned to live in the right now. I've learned in whatever state I'm in, I can trust Christ. I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. What is God doing right now?
And I think all those words are active. Learned, you continually have to learn.
Mhm.
It's a practice. Wait on the Lord. I don't know if you've heard John Corson talk about that word wait and what it really means. It doesn't mean to be sitting there
Yeah.
just doing nothing. You're like an attendant. You are waiting on
Yeah.
the Lord. And when the Lord says, so the idea is that we're not looking for a state in contentment. We're looking for a contentment continuum.
Right.
You're continually learning to be content. You're continually waiting. It's active.
Yeah, because in what Paul's
Seeking
saying,
peace and pursuing it.
in Christ I can do that. So he's
Yeah.
got this constant awareness of his there-ness. He's like, it's in Christ that I find my strength. Even when I'm weak, I'm strong.
Mm-hmm.
So last chapter, Job's now going to give his final defense of his personal purity. He says, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? For what portion of God is there from above, and what inheritance of the Almighty from on high? Is not destruction to the wicked, and a strange punishment to the workers of iniquity? Doth not he see my ways and count all my steps? So he says, I haven't lusted. There's no lust. That's not an issue. I'm not looking at a man.
Scratch that off.
I made a covenant with mine eyes. I'm not going through what I'm going through because, I'm lusting. And then he says in verse 5, there's no lying. He says, if I have walked with vanity, or if my foot have hasted to deceit, let me be weighed in an even balance, that God may know mine integrity. If my steps hath turned out of the way, and mine heart walked after mine eyes, if any blot hath cleaved unto my hands, then let me sow, and let another eat. Yea, let my offspring be rooted out. If my heart have been deceived by a woman, or if I have laid wait at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind unto another, and let others bow down upon her. For this is an heinous crime, yea, it is an iniquity to be punished by the judges. He said, there's no adultery. There's no lust, there's no lying, there's no adultery in my life. He says, for if a fire that consumeth to destruction, and would root out all mine increase, if I did despise the cause of my manservant or my maidservant when they contended with me, what then shall I do when God riseth up, and when he visiteth? What shall I answer him? Did not he that made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? So he said, there's been no oppression. I haven't mistreated my manservant,
better than
my
anybody.
maidservant. I don't think I'm better than my servants. If I have withheld the poor from their desire, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel myself alone, or the fatherless hath not eaten thereof? For from my youth he was brought up with me as with a father, and I have guided her from my mother's womb. If I have seen any perish for want of clothing, or any poor without covering, if his loins have not blessed me, and if he were not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, if I have lifted up my hand against the fatherless, when I saw my help in the gate, then let mine arm fall off from my shoulder blade, and mine arm be broken from the bone. For destruction from God was a terror to me, and by reason of his highness I could not endure. He says, there's been no lack of compassion. I've helped the poor, I've helped the widow, I've helped the fatherless. Then he says, if I have made gold my hope, or have if I have made gold my hope, or have said to the fine gold, thou art my confidence, if I rejoiced because my wealth was great, or because mine hand had gotten much, if I beheld the sun when it shineth, or the moon walking in brightness, and my heart hath been secretly enticed, or my mouth hath kissed my hand. He said, there's been no materialism. This also were an iniquity to be punished by the judge, for I should have denied the God that is above. If I rejoiced at the destruction of him that hated me, or lifted up myself when evil found him, neither have I suffered my mouth to sin by wishing a curse on his soul. If the men of my tabernacle said not, oh, that we had of his flesh, we cannot be satisfied. The stranger did not lodge in the street, but I opened my doors to the traveler. Then he says in verse 33, if I have covered my transgression as Adam, by hiding my iniquity in my bosom, he says, there's no hidden sin in my life. Did I fear a great multitude, or did the contempt of families terrify me, that I kept silence and went not out of the door? Oh, that one would hear me. Behold, my desire is that the Almighty would answer me. He's going to.
Yeah.
He will.
And that mine adversary had written a book. Surely I would take it upon my shoulder and bind it as a crown to me. I would declare unto him the number of my steps, as a prince would go near unto him. If my land cry against me, or that the furrows likewise thereof complain, if I have eaten the fruits thereof without money, or have caused the owners thereof to lose their life, let thistles grow instead of wheat, and the cockle instead of barley. The words of Job are ended. He said, I rest my case. Drop the mic. I'm not guilty.
There's only one problem with everything he said. I, me, my.
Yeah. I, me, my.
Like
Yeah.
the rich young ruler.
Yeah.
He's, I've kept all
I've
this
done all
since my
this.
youth. Done
I've
it all.
this. Yeah. But Jesus says, you lack.
There's one thing you lack.
If you want to be perfect, if you want to be complete, you got to follow me.
That one thing
You
that the
gotta
rich young
know
ruler lacked
Yeah.
is the same thing that Job lacks.
Yep. Same things we lack.
Same things we lack.
Right.
Well,
We try to measure ourselves up by all these other things.
That highest thing in your heart, that's where Jesus needs to be. You need to take the highest thing in your heart off, which Job is Job's character.
Yes.
He's like, I am flawless, and I'll hold that up to anybody. Rich young ruler's
to
like,
the day I die.
yeah.
Yeah.
And even God said he's righteous, but God was saying something different.
Right. He wasn't saying you're
God was
blameless,
saying,
you're sinless.
You're righteous because you believe me,
Right.
and I'm going to show you.
That's right. Yeah, you're not righteous because you're always right, Job.
Right.
But Job's equating righteous with
Yeah.
being right.
Yeah.
They're equating righteous with being right, too. And none of them are right. God's going to
And
show up.
when you believe God, then you take God's righteousness. God replaces your righteousness with his.
Yeah.
Replaces my rightness,
Right.
what I think is my rightness, with his righteousness.
Righteousness.
Yeah.
Drop the mic.
Yeah, because this whole, right, that's right. Because this whole debate is going on because of man's perception of right and wrong, man's perception of wickedness and righteousness, man's perception of who God is and who God isn't. And And it's in this place of suffering that God's going to be able to make some corrections for all four of these guys before it's over with.
Yeah. Yeah,
And-
Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar weren't the only ones that were wrong and needed to learn some things.
So why do the righteous suffer? One of the reasons is because God's shaking the nonsense. He's trying to get us to a place where we can see what we couldn't otherwise see, because all of that other stuff gets in the way.
Probably the best words that I heard before I was saved was I was wallowing in self-pity about a situation, and a friend of mine said, "Victor, the world does not revolve around you."
What?
Exactly.
kidding?
I was destroyed.
What do
I'm
you
like, what does that have to do with anything? And then you realize, oh yeah, this person's right.
Yeah.
We think that the world revolves around us in the sense that we think our understanding is right, the way that we see the world. And then what we have to do, the shaking off the nonsense, is shattering our concept of how we see things. And then what we replace it with, you could replace it with despair, or you could wallow in more self-pity, which means you've learned nothing. Or you can say, oh, Lord, what are you trying to teach me?
Yeah.
What I need to know, because everything I just tried to do isn't working.
Yeah, so Job drops the mic. His three friends are convinced God's going to judge him. Job is convinced God's going to vindicate him. But before we figure out what God's going to do, Lord willing, next time we get together, one other guy is going to step onto the scene. Apparently, he showed up at some point, and
He
he's just
came
been
in on the wind or
he's
something.
been sitting there quietly, and now he's going to speak in our next study. So, see you guys with that study.